Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us once again. We're back indoors. Common Sanity episode, insert number here. and I'm joined today, I'm delighted to say, by Suzanne Moore, James.
Hello.
How do you pronounce it?
Innes Smith.
Innes Smith. I just wanted to get it exactly right. And James Chiavarini, our host, who has never sat down with us before and has been focused on delivering the food on time. and today, very broadly speaking, we are discussing men and women. Can they get along together?
No.
I'm sorry, this is it now.
And then having answered that question so abruptly and decisively, what remains to discuss? So yes, hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation. It was partly inspired by a conversation I had with James some years ago. You were doing a podcast with somebody else.
Yeah, Dr. Stephen Blumenthal, who's psychologist, and it was. You were very interesting, actually.
And that was roughly around what I guess crisis in masculinity, a sense that men had lost their way a little bit, and weren't sure what was expected of them.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen works very much with young men who have problems with self-esteem and mental health and all that kind of stuff. So he's at the sort of sharp end. But he's fascinating because he comes at it from a medical perspective, and he's got a lot of wise words on the subject, and it's not poor old men, aren't they, hard done by. Right. He goes very much evidence based, and he's fascinating. He writes he's now working for the Telegraph actually.
And now Suzanne wrote something recently on Jordan Peterson's second book, and that was a really interesting commission, I thought, because I suppose if you have a reputation, with at the risk of oversimplifying it, you are seen as somebody who is sceptical perhaps about the claims to victimhood of men, and certainly middle-class men, and Jordan Peterson had come into your crosshairs before that. But your review of his book was, and also your Substack about the experience, was more sympathetic than I thought I might have expected it to be. Or nuanced, let's say, that's always the word.
Do you know what? That's, he is...
Thanks, my friend.
My youngest daughter is obsessed with Peterson because and she said something to me very interesting the other day. Do you know who he is?
I interviewed him a couple of years ago in Cambridge, actually.
Did
For
the Cambridge you must tell me about it. But she said to me the other day that his latest YouTube or whatever it is, he was. I think it was with Russell Brand, and he was sort of practically crying most of it. And it's so this idea that he's this.
But you know why he was crying on that one? He was crying with gratitude because somebody had come up to him on the street and said, "Thank you for helping me improve my life," and he was like, I want to know more. What exactly is it that I said that helped you? And the man explained.
God, he's such a bizarre mixture.
It really was a very strange.
I think his tears are genuine when they flow.
Yeah.
I think he does genuinely. I think he does genuinely. He's a true believer.
I think he's a bit on the edge, isn't he?
Yeah.
That story, the actual story of what happened to him. Being.
Yes.
Put on antidepressants, not realising that you can get addicted.
I think my dad knew that in the 80s.
We all know that. Yeah. He's this clinical psychologist. I mean,
It seemed like Michaela, was it Michaela, the daughter, had sort of taken over the running of stuff.
Well, she's a big business now with her own, I have to say, that diet is insane.
Well, the meat
just
one.
Pure beef.
Carnivore diet.
What do they call it? Animals that...
Ruminants.
Ruminants, that's it. That's not a word I ever think about. But the poor mother, Tammy, who's recovered from the cancer, she can't eat. She's gone on it now, but she can't eat goats. So she
no cloven hooves.
So
sort of a bit like
so her diet is even more. Restricted.
She's looking good on it.
One Jewish fridge.
I know she's making money.
But I think you said she had. Excuse me. Mouthful, but she has had rheumatoid arthritis, I think,
which is awful.
I think if you had a severe autoimmune issues, then a restricted diet can help over a short period of time. But I think eventually, your body does need to get back to it.
I dealt with this with a family member, and rheumatoid arthritis is horrible disease, especially in young people.
Yeah.
It is horrible. They do. You go through excluding certain food groups to see what works. but you don't. Only,
No. The funny thing with Jordan Peterson, I thought, and he was a fairly good place to start with this conversation because he's kind of the icon, I suppose, of what should men do to try and
he's like the
kind of get
lightning
themselves.
rod.
The story of his own personal journey in the last 2 years just seems hugely overwritten. I mean, you couldn't find a set of more absurdly dramatised events to counterpoint. You know, he's literally gone on a sort of Jungian journey through the belly of the dragon or whatever, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's just. I mean, I almost feel like it's. Almost feel sceptical about the truth of it to an extent. You know what I mean? If it weren't, and yet when you see him, I think he's genuine.
He's I suppose for me, his view of men are order and women are chaos.
Yeah.
And in fact, he is chaos.
He is chaos. Well, he embraces chaos much more than his objective, explicit, avowed views would suggest you would expect him to. Certainly, he seems to go there.
So when I was reading, especially the second book, I do get a sense of him as an actual therapist, and I did a couple of years training myself as a therapist, and you can sort of see that he's probably quite good actually.
Yeah.
You know, he has empathy with people. You know, it could be someone you wouldn't imagine him to have. I could see that in him. He's not this hard and you have to do it this way.
He's not a taskmaster.
No. And that.
I think he'd be a listener.
And,
I think he would.
And that made me, because I came to him, he was sort of presented as, you will hate this. But when I read it, like, I thought, no, I can see in your practice you probably do help
The
people.
thing that I find interesting about him is that point of view, like, you will hate this, he did become a hate figure for the left. I say the left.
He became a lightning rod.
Terms, yeah. And I thought, of all the people, I understand why you don't like the alt-right, I understand why you don't like the types of, like Stefan, what's his name, Molyneux and all those kind of guys who tell women to use their eggs while they're fresh. That sort of thing, you know. There's a lot of stuff that I can understand why that kind of ruffles feathers. But he was so focused on enabling young people to take responsibility for themselves. It seemed extraordinary. I thought that was
and no one else was saying
telling us something about what these culture wars are really about. I say culture wars, but you know what I mean.
But why did that get people's backs up, do you think? So is
exactly.
it the fact
That's
that it was
question.
for boys and men rather than... Because if it had been about women and girls, I'm
think
sure there wouldn't have been the same...
I think some of it was because he was embraced by
association with the...
By right-wing
right-wingers,
incels or whatever we want to call them, or men's rights activists who really are actively hostile to women. That is not his fault, but he was. And he became a figurehead for
Was
those
that just the
people.
trans thing? His rejection of imposed pronouns?
I think that was at the beginning, and then because he went on a massive. In a way, it's no wonder he had a kind of breakdown when you looked at his touring schedule. He was like in a different city every night. You know, it's this person who's had a kind of quiet, sheltered life, and suddenly.
And especially, I watched his O2 one with Sam Harris and Douglas Murray was adjudicating.
Oh God,
and
Douglas
it was
Murray.
really interesting to see three very different approaches to public speaking. And it's what I always loved about Peterson and still do, and is what you see on that Russell Brand podcast, which is Brand hosting, I think that one. Right? It's the intensity of his involvement, his engagement. It's
evangelical.
Powers of magnitude higher than Sam Harris can phone that shit in all day. He can sit in a studio or on a stage, or he can be on Bill Maher's show confronting Ben Affleck, calling him an Islamophobe. And his blood pressure wouldn't rise, his pulse rate wouldn't differ. You can see it in his eyes. He's like some Mekon or whatever. You know, he's like. I mean, he's a high intellect, Sam Harris. I'm not calling him a fraud or a grifter. He's made a huge contribution, I think, to our understanding of the world. But he can just keep it there.
But maybe that's
Jordan
because
Peterson was he's like clinging to the wreckage, you know, the whole time. He's like.
But that's why he's compelling, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
on one hand, he's saying, men, you've got to sort of toughen up and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then he's just this kind of ball of emotion. And he's so emotional.
I think there may be
and
a little bit of
really
Jesus
helps him, though,
complex
in one sense.
going
I think
on.
his breakdown, in one sense,
and the responsibility that comes with that must be,
which is why it's interesting watching him talk to Brand, because Brand definitely had that. He did a whole show called The Messiah Complex.
Oh yes, of course,
and he's quite self-aware now, Russell Brand. I disliked him early on, but let's say at least the way he discusses himself on his own podcast seems to suggest to me a certain ironic distance.
Can I
wade in there?
You're fighting for the same territory, so I can understand.
No, I am not. Can I just say...
You've got the same haircut, and I've got to say, it suits you better, I would say.
Can I just say that in my long history of writing, very few people have tried to sue me for libel.
Oh, really?
But if I'll just give you three names of people who did. Hugh Hefner tried to sue me for saying he was a pimp and his girlfriend were prostitutes, and I thought, let that one go to court, lovely.
Yeah.
Nadine Dorris tried to sue me for an actual quote that she had given as libelous, because she's just balmy, bonkers. And Russell Brand tried to sue me for saying that his first book was ghostwritten, when I know the ghostwriter. So I'm not keen on.
Was that book you wrote?
Yes, I'm not keen on. At that time, he was the biggest anarchist in the world. So I'm not keen on people,
suing people.
I just don't know what to believe when he opens his mouth.
It didn't happen. Anyway, it didn't happen, and because obviously.
Well, he obviously knew that he didn't have a leg to stand on.
No, the newspaper lawyers just.
Got involved. Yeah.
I had to write this apology that went under the column, which actually made it seem even worse. When you can word things in such way. But
I'm surprised as well, because he is quite capable of writing a book like that. I don't think it's just a question of laziness, isn't it? It's not like.
But anyway, I've seen him live as well, and God, I mean. I don't know if he's like Peterson, because he's so feeding off his fans, and at one point he said, I can go all night, and sort of, and the girls, who fancy him are going great, and I think, oh please no, I mean you've done like 2.5 hours already. I mean, there's no stopping.
He's not like Peterson in lots of important respects, only in that Messiah complex.
I don't think Peterson's a narcissist as well.
No, I don't think.
And I don't think he has a sense of entitlement.
He has the Messiah complex. He has is almost like literally a sense of like the passion of the Christ.
Yeah, the
rather
Paschal
than
mystery.
like come
He's
to me.
been
He's like
through,
in the pain.
He sees himself as that sort of way in between order and chaos. Yeah,
sort of tortured.
But the chaotic element of Jordan Peterson is what makes him human. It's what makes him fascinating.
Yeah,
it's a bit like the characters. Maybe the character like Lucifer in Paradise Lost. You can identify with these characters because they are so flawed. And I think that the like you said, the sort of Jungian journey that he's gone on in the last couple of years has only made him stronger in one sense, because you can, he's not this top-down, drill sergeant fella telling wagging your finger at the boys.
Of which I do find those guys that would just
they're awful.
But they're like Jocko Willink, this kind of Navy SEAL character who wakes up at 4:30 every morning and posts a picture of his digital watch on Twitter. Fuck off!
But is it?
You went to bed at 7 o'clock. That's not like
heroic.
Discipline. That's just weird, skewed values. The
Marky
good
Mark,
stuff happens at night.
But do you have a sense that people think about Peterson as a kind of father figure, flawed but fatherly? Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
And I think he's let down mostly by his fans. I think he's misunderstood mostly by his fans. I think generally, 90% of what he says is misconstrued, and I think a lot of that misconstruction comes from his fans. And they twist
not
it.
all his fans, but some very vocal.
But a lot of it. If you look on YouTube, the amount of videos that are labelled like Jordan Peterson destroys so-and-so.
Oh yes, I know.
And you think, but it's just so pathetic. And I think that in one sense, maybe he's enabled that, maybe he has no control over that. I mean, that's a different argument.
Well, he is super sensitive. If he does an interview, and I mean, The Sunday Times.
Oh, the Deccan Aikenhead.
Yes.
Yeah, he was
Thanks,
furious about it. wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
I didn't see that
And
one. Well, the big one he broke in this country, and I think it was important to him generally, was the Cathy Newman interview,
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
it? And in a way, I mean, I loved it because I had been tired of seeing a lot of people denigrating him, and I was like, no, he's intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. He's thought these things through more than you think. And there was, I mean, yeah, it kind of was like. It felt to me not Cathy Newman as an individual, but Channel 4 News as an entity and a sort of establishment of a certain kind of, or like very much a representative of a certain kind of mindset, had completely underestimated him and had come, you know, with a knife to a gunfight, basically,
Yes.
and they were exposed, and then they
Unlike
resorted
Helen
to
Lewis.
all this, oh no, there's online abuse stuff. And I was satisfied, but in hindsight, I think actually it was a shame because it created that sense of him immediately being this, you know, a kind of jousting
got
match.
to, yes.
Yeah.
But the Helen Lewis interview was much more interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Helen,
And
Helen,
she arrived
Helen's great.
intelligent and prepared,
Helen is
and she knew
I'm
what.
on with the news quiz with her tomorrow.
Oh, I love her.
She's so smart
I
and
think
she's so
Helen is
erudite.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. But she was getting, wasn't she? On yes, he does know certain things. He doesn't know about everything. I mean, that's so. When he's talking about biology and lobsters, and you know, we are basically lobsters, but we're not. You know, I mean, we're not. And you can take apart some of his arguments.
The recognition that history's solutions to historical problems, to deep-seated problems, weren't simply to be dismissed out of hand as being simply artifacts of a patriarchal, you know, culture that had been and gone, and its time is up.
But he reminds. I don't know if you read her at the time, but I went over. It was in the 90s to interview Camille Paglia,
Yeah.
and they remind me of each other.
Well, they interview each other. They have great
do,
conversations on
I
that.
want to. I haven't seen that because she was doing the same thing. She was sort of saying, basically, you know,
Sexual personae.
there are these archetypes, and you know, there haven't been any great. There hasn't been a female, you know, Mozart, and there never will be. You know, men and women are wired up differently, and so lots of feminist people like me was sort of arguing with her because it was too determined, biologically determined, and
She's brilliantly
she's-
astute on the Rolling Stones as well. Where has testosterone gone from pop music?
Yes.
That's a great speech.
I mean, I spent 2 days with her, and my God, I was.
Exhausted.
Yes, because at that point she was. I think now she says she's trans, but she was a lesbian, but she couldn't get a girlfriend. Which she shouts at you the entire time. I couldn't get a girlfriend. Which is wherever you are, you
Can't
know.
get
And,
no satisfaction.
and it's just. But we went to this. She took me to this restaurant, and you know. So when we were in her university, it was in.
Was
can't
she
remember.
Chicago?
No, was it? Oh God.
She's East
Gone,
Coast.
yeah,
Or
not
Midwest, rather.
Pennsylvania. Anyway, we were in, and clearly her students love her. They love her because she's passionate. But we went to this restaurant, and you know how in the States, especially in that part of the States, you get soft-shell crab. Well, it wasn't. She just had we had a normal crab, and she just ate it.
The bloke.
I mean, it's like. And the photographer, I was with some, was just looking at each other, and she's like, "What are you looking at?" And then that was the first course, and I just sort of sat there because she literally just ate this crab, and then of course for the main she had raw steak. I mean, absolutely, and it was just exactly what you imagined that she would eat. And then I started phoning up with some of her because I was doing a sort of profile of her, and I was phoning up some of her friends, and they said, no, she has nothing. She just has one chair in her room. She's not had a particularly easy life. But she's super intelligent.
She is quite masculine, isn't she?
Her style is quite forthright, isn't it?
No, I'm just going to take it easy a bit. But it was also hilarious because you know, at that point you could get her to slag off any other feminist, Naomi Wolf, Germaine Greer, you know, and she would just tear them to pieces. And it all
Does
made
she have
great
any
coffee.
that she likes, in fact? I mean, are there anything she admires?
I think maybe she now would.
Hoff Summers is possibly. Is it?
She's quite.
know.
I mean,
Maybe-
I see what
think
she's
maybe-
like conservative, but she's
Yeah.
kind of a bit. She's quite middle of the road in a way.
I think
isn't
she
Yeah.
probably
It's
did
like-
have.
It's not really a philosopher. It's more like she's more like a commentator
I
on.
think she did have respect for Germaine in a sort of way, but I mean, but it was just. I was
Was that
just
before
comparing.
you had your like running with the Guardian establishment? That I sense.
Thanks, James.
I might be wrong, but I sense that you know, when you were like turned on by allies, Had you felt that
last
you
year?
Personally? Yeah. But this was
Yeah.
before that, was it? I don't know if that has changed your view of the sort of that.
Oh yeah.
feminist
That's all.
establishment,
That's all years ago.
yeah.
What do you want me to? I mean,
No, I don't want to like a. But I just mean in terms of looking at Camille Pallier and how.
No, because that was in the 90s. I suppose
Right,
I was
yeah.
always. I guess. I've always been interested in figures who aren't going to adhere to the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
I don't have to agree with them. They interest me, and
right.
for me, the Guardian, on the left as it had become, especially under Corbyn, you know, you just had to think these things. There's tick box of that you have to think this on race, you have to think this on anti-Semitism, you think this on trans people, and I felt increasingly, and well, I do feel that. There isn't much original thinking going on, and nor is it working for them politically.
But this is a function of academia as much as anything. I think the more you think about things, the more you find little. What they call it, the vanity of small differences. I can't remember whose phrase it is. Is it Freud maybe? But it's
Yes, it is Freud.
There's this thing that infests academia. That you start off thinking I'm going to take on this big problem in society, and after a while you start to find little differences with the other people who have identified that same big problem.
Yes.
And you just become more and more, and I almost wonder whether it isn't a brilliant kind of immune system that society and the establishment has, that it somehow creates.
It's like what Hadley was saying when we were talking to her as well. Hadley Freeman, she was saying, you know,
Was she? Yes.
Yeah.
Hadley,
I love
Hadley.
Hadley's so smart, so lovely.
Hadley was one of the people who's publicly stuck her neck out for me, because meanwhile everybody was messaging me, this is wrong,
But surely your fellow journalists were all backing you, because it goes against every journalist's bone in his body
James,
not to take, not to go against orthodoxy.
I think we're of a generation that thinks that, and of course,
where's the joy in not popping bubbles?
All the names, all the big names, if you like, were saying yes, this is ridiculous. But some digital doodah in Australia, I'd upset them, because I said that biological sex existed.
Yeah.
So,
do you think that's got much time left to run? That particular shibboleth of orthodoxy?
That's the one that's going to break it, I think.
Well, today, obviously, I'm watching the Mayor Forrester case.
The boundaries between the genders then, in that respect, are blurring. I mean, going back to your talking about rock stars earlier, the idea, you think of Robert Plant, he sounded like a big, healthy,
high-pitched.
Yeah, but he sang from his balls. He sang from his balls, whereas Chris, whatever his name from Coldplay, sings from his nose and
Sam
his
Smith
bosoms.
sings from his sort of.
He doesn't.
Multiple identity,
Tattoo.
I think that's significant. I think the fact that we don't have macho, not macho, but masculine singers.
The blues. Funny, my son is 14 and he's learning. He's basically had a really productive lockdown. I envy him. He's taught himself electric guitar.
Brilliant.
And he plays along with like the bands that I kind of go, okay, and I put on Since I've Been Loving You. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I just realised you couldn't release a song like that now. It would just be absurd. I'm not saying it would be banned or people would be angry. They just wouldn't understand it. A song in which a young man expresses that kind of angst, that kind of unhappiness with the contract in which he finds himself, with the soul of a woman was created below. It's like, the blues expresses really deep, irresolvable differences whereas most of my daughter, she's 16, most of her kind of generation now hardly see any difference. They have sleepovers, male and female, they all just kind of nest, like baby rats or something.
I always think
is that a step forward, do you think, or is that
I don't know,
dangerous?
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of this is because there is no sense of being attached to a more primordial sense of who you are.
Yeah, right.
And the sense that, if you think about when we all worked the land, when we all lived in an agrarian economy, you did the job that your father did, that his father did before that, and there was a certain expectation of what you were going to be.
I'm
And I think in a world where anybody can become anything, when all opportunities are open to them, where you can literally leave home at 16 and go and work in Beijing or Hong Kong or wherever you want, how much of that is a problem of abundance? So you can say, well, I can choose this or I can choose that, and all of a sudden you have this paradox of choice where everything's open to you, and you think, but you're still paradoxically weightless. You still feel like you're disconnected from something.
Did you have a citizen of the world time in your life? Because I certainly did.
Not really. I sort of left school and went to work in France for a while. Both my parents emigrated across. My mum came over when she was a baby in arms, and my dad came here to work as a miner. And I really wanted that sort of baptism of fire. When I was like 17, 18, I really wanted to find that initiation into being who I wanted to be. But I mean, most of my friends just went to Thailand and hang out with some idiot called Jeremy and Mungo. Do you know what I mean? It's like
they still do. Well, apart from the pandemic, they still do.
That's not really much. That's not really much of a kind of initiation, right? Do you know what I mean? And I would, and also this whole thing that Paul was saying the other day, Paul Embry was saying that we don't have any apprenticeships left. We don't really have. We denigrate manual labour now.
Yeah.
So there is this whole thing of so it's just a sense of it just breeds more and more and more.
And I have a friend
the word entitlement,
who I won't name, but is quite well versed in these things. But I'm trusting on his evidence to support this assertion. He says that in the immediate post-war era, Britain still had a tradition of, I think there's SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises. And a lot of them were like machine shops, a lot of engineering, that kind of work. And men mostly would pass on to young men mostly, but there were also female equivalents. Understanding, knowledge, experience, training, it was done quite organically, and a succession of British governments quite deliberately dismantled that and imported American-style mass production as the way of the future, because it's the only way to be efficient and to compete on the world economic stage. And then, of course, that was a disaster as soon as we were out-competed in a matter of moments, because America at least had built up the capital of having that from the days of Henry Ford. We had about 20 years before Japan shot past us, and we've never got it back.
I saw that growing up. I grew up in Suffolk, and all the, it was like, because I'm so old, that there were little fields, and then agribusiness moved in, and so it's all those big, huge, sort of like plantation fields. So the boys I knew, yes, that's right. So all the boys I knew, who would have got their dad's pig farm, were then just labourers, and they were demoted in a sense. They didn't have their own little land holding. But back to your question, what is it that makes someone choose or feel grounded or want to have an identity? I mean, you can see that a lot of kids are, and I'm not saying this. I don't want to patronise kids, because I think a lot of them are, way ahead of us. But this whole thing, I'm not going to declare my gender. I'm going to be non-binary. I'm not going to be pinned down, is a way to try to at least be interesting and individual. And they all do the same thing. Actually, they all dye their hair blue.
Like tattoos.
But it's not something. I mean, I would like gender roles to be less stereotyped. And I mean, when my daughter had, recently had a baby, I mean, I have never seen. Obviously, I don't hang around baby shops anymore, but everything is now pink or blue. I mean, gender has become even more codified than when I had my kids.
Than in the 1950s of
How much of that is natural? Just a natural.
Oh, it can't. That much pink cannot be natural.
It's marketing bullshit, and I do totally agree with that it's become very toxic. At the exact same time that intelligent, intellectual, and maybe left-leaning people are questioning it all, the market has gone completely the other way, and it's like, or I'd say the market that advertises frankly to those people who are not reading The Guardian.
Which is most
it's reacted with, it's just absolutely stomach churning. The kind of, I mean, there are Twitter accounts that will highlight, why is this a girl's toy? Why is this a boy's toy? And they get angry about it and go, oh, for God's sake, it's just a toy. But then you see, yes, there are bibs for boys with rockets on, and for girls with princesses on.
Yeah, unicorns.
That's like the 1950s. That isn't going to happen.
But
That isn't even the case in my own family. I have one of each. It's a small sample.
I thought they'd done tests where when girls do tend to go for the fluffy, unicorny things, and the boys tend to go for the cars
It's that
and the lorries.
tend to thing, isn't it? That's the thing. I think if you've got a dividing line in the middle, and the boys are 55%, the girls are 45% on trucks and rocket ships.
Yeah.
And then you use that to say, therefore, all girls' toys and bibs and sleeper suits and everything else will be in this mode. Then you've massively overplayed your hand.
Okay. Why is that? Why should that be harmful to anyone? If you feed your kid the fact that girls wear pink, and what's the worst thing that can happen?
Well, I think for a lot of mothers going out to shop for a start, they feel that they're being asked to assign a certain kind of role to their daughter at the age of 6 months or whatever that they don't feel comfortable with. I can definitely understand why that would be aggravating.
Well, nobody likes to be marketed at, but at the same time, if it's tradition,
I do think a lot of it is, to be honest, is simply mass marketing, mass production, mass manufacturing.
It all comes out of the same
comes
factory
from
in
China.
China.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that is actually, what was his name? The Small is Beautiful guy in the 1973 or whatever said, when you have problems like this, 9 times out of 10 it's because things are done at scale, because the economies of scale have overwhelmed all the other considerations that might make life
isn't it
better.
more worrying the sexualisation of a lot of these?
Oh, that's also
I mean,
very
especially
worrying.
with girls'
hideous,
toys.
Yeah.
But
You're from a Mediterranean family where there is a degree of solidity. There's a structure and a framework. And so many, I think, British and I would suspect American kids are growing up without that now, without any sort of expectation of any kind of uncle. Or we were talking, I know, like just between us, but it's obviously relevant, about that kind of rites of passage moment where there's like a 13, 14-year-old boy, and you go out, the dad and a couple of uncles and a couple of older brothers or cousins or whatever. And he has a sort of a night of, it's a bit of a roller coaster, He might be exposed to a degree of humiliation or barrack room sort of, teasing or whatever. And then he's also brought in and, you're all right. It's absent. You're just cast out. I don't know at what point they go.
A lot of
them
it
never
is,
know
though.
they were there
I
in the
think
first place.
that idea of, God, I sound like Jordan Peterson now. But rich.
The entire point of inviting you.
That's happening.
Snagged.
But ritual is really important. Rites of passage.
Very much so.
And we've lost that in lots
For
of
men,
ways.
for men, we've lost it for centuries. We haven't had that since the Knights of the Middle Ages. And I think it wasn't about you. It was about the part that you play in the wider society. It was about looking after the widows and the orphans. You could only be a knight if you looked after the oppressed and the helpless. That's why you didn't become a knight to get rich and make money quick.
Gangs have stepped into that gap at
That's what
times
people
around
say.
society, but I
Hugely.
don't know how big they are. They're certainly not in my son's
Simon,
life. I don't know they are
we've
in
got over
Brighton.
30% of families in London now
Right.
don't have a stable father at home. And if
Right.
you're living in London and you're a single mum, let's be honest, you're going to be working at least 2 jobs to make ends meet. Because London is an expensive city. So you're working, you've probably got a day job, you've probably got a night job, and you've probably got a 14-year-old son and a 11-year-old boy.
And all
How
the worries
hell are
that
you
come
gonna-
from
and the
selecting
worries that go-
boyfriends
And
that
then they're
aren't gonna
exposed
be
to all.
able-
Exactly. How the hell are you supposed to keep an eye on
But it's
these
become it's maybe something you can. So why has it become a sort of right-wing position to advocate fathers and nuclear and family stuff? I got into trouble with my book about masculinity, where I wasn't saying there is a right way of doing this. I was looking at some evidence and saying, well, the evidence seems to tip this way, but that's not to say that single parents and same-sex relationships are.
Yeah.
Why has that become such a dangerous position to take? Especially from the left, you're basically saying, well, you're demonizing single mothers. Oh, no,
I mean, I think sort of historically, I mean, I'm a single mother, and there was a point at which the Tories, under John Major, deliberately targeted single mothers as the source of all evil, and I mean, I've had, one of the worst meals of my life with Ian Duncan Smith, who lectured me on the evils of single motherhood while I was sitting there thinking, maybe you could ask me something about it rather than tell me. I think possibly, and I've written some very harsh stuff on it, and so I have to put my hand up to it. We don't actually know what the role of fathers are anymore, really. So when, I mean, my children have contact with their fathers, and that's, you know, I've always made that happen. That's it, because everyone has said that's the right thing. But I'm not. There was a point where women were encouraged to go out to work in the night. You know, sort of, for me, you know, say in the 90s, and it was all the slight Thatcherite thing going on. Women have just got to get ahead in the workplace, and you've got to have the great relationship, the kids, the career.
You've got to have it all.
You've got to have it all, and that was just like a double shift for women really, because they were you're doing everything, and then you're like
picking up the slack at home.
And I know so many sort of marriages that collapsed and stuff because the guys weren't pulling their weight,
and they still want their socks picked up off the bedroom floor.
So
that's a generational thing, I think. It's changed.
I hope. Well, I hope so. But is it? I don't think nowhere. When you ask whether it's right or left, I'm really on so many of these issues now. Really rethinking my own position about what left is, right?
Yeah.
So if you say to me, should we support families and should we support, of course should we make the lives of single parents better, should we encourage people to stay together to be with their kids, I would say that's not really a left or right thing, that's just a sort of a good thing. But I do think men have to step up, and many women, and I am one of them, have found it easier to bring up their children on their own than with a partner that didn't pull their weight.
Yeah.
My sister-in-law used to be married to an abusive husband.
My partner wasn't abusive.
Oh no, but I mean,
saying.
this guy was useless and abusive.
Yeah,
so
well, you know.
But and also, my mother-in-law had a husband who wasn't great. She now lives with us, and she said to me the other day, because she was saying, I couldn't have gone all the way that she was highly successful in everything that she did and raised 3 children successfully and was very high achieving. She says, I couldn't have done it if I was married.
Well, you
I couldn't have done it. She said, I could only do it because I was a single mom.
But it presumably goes both ways anyway. And all things being equal, I think maybe this idea that you have a mother and a father is kind of an ideal. If it fails, then obviously everything else you make it work. But the idea that to hold that up as some kind of ideal is itself.
It's just about backing the likely horse, isn't it? It's just which way to bet. It's not applying moral pressure. I think it's just saying, in all other things being equal, which family is more likely. But you're absolutely right. Once it starts to slide, and once men no longer feel either that they have any personal payoff for being a good father, and neither will society give a damn one way or the other, and they'll still be allowed to drink with their mates despite having left their family in the lurch, they think we'll sort it. I think a lot of Peterson's stuff has always been like, okay, the patriarchy is so called, the idea that there is a family and he's, the father is the head of the household and he has a certain level of esteem in society, is kind of there, however much it might gall us, because to be honest, men would quite like to just have their wicked way with women and then disappear before she's even through the first trimester. And
really,
there is I think
a little bit Boris
of that,
Johnson is our prime minister. I mean, this
exactly.
is
but I know lots of families
comfortable with
where
that.
the woman
We're
is
very comfortable
definitely
with
the matriarch in the relationship. Does she,
in families, I agree she is, but that's the point. If
my family was,
what I'm
my
saying
mum
is,
was.
if society gives a kind of gloss to the whole notion that a man is to be respected because he's in high esteem, and this happens around the world, and it still happens. Funny enough, go back to Arundhati Roy. This is, like, in her view, a big part of what Indian society is. That a man, as long as he's held in high esteem in society, can be an absolute tyrant in his own home, and nobody will bat an eyelid or notice that his wife is sporting bruises or whatever. There is this kind of notion that he is the king of his castle in that respect, and that's not just a British right-wing proposition. That's how higher up, that's how traditional societies have worked.
But was it the same here?
I'm saying to some extent at that point that it was, a man would, and this is the thing, the kind of should it be, could it be, would it be, these things get confused. This is not to say that it's morally justified, but it does work to some extent to keep men attached to their family, because the society that they live in holds them in high regard for doing so. Nowadays,
in as much as it's important to keep a woman involved in the family.
totally.
So it's not, you know.
But women, I think, do have. Maybe this is controversial now even, but I think women are more inclined to stay with their kids. We feel it like a gut punch when, like, a woman deserts her kids.
Yeah.
We still feel that, or let
Yeah,
alone
yeah,
a Myra
yeah.
Hindley,
Like if
which
a man
is like
walks
that's,
out.
you know, it's like, well,
Could that be
that'll
considered
happen,
a
you know.
sexist position? Though?
Oh,
If
it's-
all things being equal, to say something like that,
Still
could
a
that be
sparkly.
considered?
Thank you.
You know,
yeah.
you're saying that women are like this and men are that. I mean,
Oh, it is a sexist position, but I think I'm acknowledging something that's been borne out over centuries around the world as having. This is, I think, a lot of society's mechanisms are there initially to offset what would be iniquities, and then they become so entrenched that they overpower those iniquities and they head off on their own. You know, this is the day.
But look at the reason for. Sorry, Suzanne. You were gonna say.
No, I was just thinking about what James was saying about, you know, is it back to the, you know, it's better if mum and dad stays together and all that stuff, and then thinking about what you were saying, and for me, the problem is not really whether we've got this sort of, you know, the conventional family, but the nuclear family has become very isolated, and what you're talking about is an extended family. So I know so many people who wouldn't have an uncle who takes them out and does the things that you say with a 14-year-old.
They don't. We've lost it, and we lost it centuries ago.
But you know, it's a kind of cultural thing. It's a class thing too. Because I mean, I know. I mean, when my daughter's boyfriend he's her partner, comes from a sort of solid working class background. And if any of those guys hear of another man who's hit a woman, they're there. I mean, they are there. It is like that's crossed the line, and you do not cross it. And
but also that was quite a conservative viewpoint.
But I mean, they don't talk about feminism or anything, and they think I'm the weirdest person I've ever met. You know, so it's not. But it's just like these. It's quite. You know, to be a man, you don't hit a woman. This is what being a
There's
man.
There's an honour code, isn't there?
It's an honour thing,
especially
and I. How do we get to the position where, you know, women? We don't go back to the old ways that oppressed women, so women weren't allowed to do things, but we are able to encourage a kind of masculinity that can walk beside. I always say, you know, what do women want? They want men to walk beside them. You know, just you know, feminism for me is don't be a dick. You know, walk beside me. Don't walk in front of me, and I won't walk behind you. Just walk beside me.
But,
it's like that. I don't have to spend my life, you know, being particularly nice to men I don't like or respecting them or anything like that. But if you want to make things better for women, listen to what they say, and it is absolutely crucial that you bring up your children to have this. Have
The thing about it that's interesting to me is it's not been like a kind of we've been trying to reverse. It's like a lot of trends that have been happening quietly have been accelerated. You know, and this is why firms like Amazon and stuff have done well out of it, and why diseases of isolation, syndromes of atomization have rocketed because that's what was already happening. I said on that Paul Embry Zoom conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, and I stand by this like almost more than anything else I believe really about how to mend society, is you need to throw open your front doors and let your kids play out on the street. That's that. If there's one thing that could change everything, that would be it for me. You know, this nuclear family shit has got to end.
That's what I was getting at. I think that's where, you know, a lot of unhappiness comes with, because women feel, you know, we know women initiate divorce. It's usually more because they feel lonely and they feel isolated, and that's why, as a single parent, and then they go and meet other single parents and they all hang out together. You feel like, well, I can never.
And one of them says, "Oh, since I got the divorce, I'm a member of the tennis club."
Also, if you look at the statistics behind the reasons for divorce, men will it's incredibly rare that a man will walk out of marriage unless he's going into the arms of another woman. Whereas women will just pull the plug on it because they're like, I can't take any of this anymore. I'm out of here. And with lockdown, they couldn't do that. Whereas a man will only because he's going to another woman. It's very rare that a man will just pull the plug on a relationship.
I mean, what you said about playing in the streets is very interesting. I watched a fantastic documentary which I highly recommend about, it's called a council estate in Camberwell. It was 1969, so things were changed. It was incredible because people are still living Victorian lives with outside loos and stuff, and yet 2 streets away there's the 60s block, and old ladies who grew up in the the turn of the century are now suddenly having a loo for the first time. But the thing they keep saying, the people who've moved to the 60s blocks, is that the one thing that's missing is the ability for their kids to go out and play.
Yeah.
Okay, they lived in squalor in these streets, and they were slums essentially. But the kids were constantly playing
shared
football,
space.
shared space in the street, in
Like
the garden,
even
front
like
gardens.
the most absurdly kind of cartoonish, I find him very amusing. There's a guy called Bronze Age Pervert. Do you know him on Twitter? Bronze Age Pervert. He is, folks. Get him. He's like he's a very funny guy. He's been doxed or whatever, and it turns out he's like a Romanian philosophy professor who created this character. But it's very funny. It's quite right. He's Nietzschean essentially. He wrote a book about it called Bronze Age Mindset, and it's about getting back to sort of martial virtues and Homeric kind of ideas. I think you have to read it tongue in cheek, but like a lot of good tongue in cheek things, it throws up ideas that are powerful. And one of them, he says, is that you live your whole life in owned space. Wherever you go, you don't even have the high street anymore. You go to the mall, the company owns the mall. You go from shop to shop, from building to building.
Land.
There's no not properly public.
No common ground.
No, you can't even. The countryside is all farmed. You have to fucking write. I mean, this is an American kind of viewpoint, but it's the same thing here. You have to fight for ramblers' rights just to walk across some cornfield. It's absurd, We grew up in a place where, like 20 yards from your front door, you were into the unknown again. And for men in particular, I do think, you need to discover those spaces. And I've always said, when I grew up in St Albans, which sounds like the most absurdly middle-class suburban neighbourhood, it's on the M25 now, it wasn't when I grew up. There were still places between built environments. There were still lanes and fields, or even just go, trudging up the track on a hot day with
your BMX.
You could muck about and nobody could say, this is my land, off you go. And it's so hard to
Yeah,
find.
but stranger danger has really had an effect.
I mean, I would be out on the heath where I lived. We'd go out. We'd be out until it got dark. We'd have to come home. No one had phones. You didn't know. My mum never knew where we were doing.
You'll be like, I'm going to go and play in the abandoned mine. All right. Be home for dinner.
Don't touch the TNT. You know what happened last time.
And it's like now, basically kids are kind of, tagged, aren't they, with the phone? Because obviously they will just switch them from the end anyway.
But the levels of child abduction are minute.
But the
And yet
fear
every parent is terrified.
Yeah.
So.
I wonder how much.
I think the fear is partly stoked. I'm going to say this is a very controversial point of view. I think it's not rational, but I think it's partly stoked by diversity. Because I think people naturally feel like, I don't know who these people are, and I don't understand. There are statistics to bear it out. There's a kind of, there's that Bowling Alone, which was a famous book written about this. I think we need to address it and overcome it and not pretend it doesn't exist. We all live together, but the truth is, he's not more likely to touch your kids than he is. These people are all, they're just like different colour skin, maybe a different style of dress, but there's no big deal. Yeah. We all need to just relax about
I've
that.
never
Might not
connected.
be. No.
I've never connected it
Middle-aged
like
men
that.
with strange glasses.
It's more.
Exactly.
Well, I used to watch those videos.
I live in Hove, which is very low on it, so I'm just saying I think that's one element that's coming. But also, obviously, the media exaggerating the threat of paedophiles, exaggerating the threat of traffic accidents. The truth is, traffic accidents involving kids are like a fraction. In the old days, Ford Capris used to tear up our road with no functioning brakes at all, with a 16-year-old on Carling Black label.
But
nowadays there's there's a Toyota Prion or whatever it's called. And you're like, oh my God, get the kids away from
But I wonder how much, going back to the whole shared space thing, what it does is, like you were saying, Suzanne, about the fact that men would step in if somebody was abusive to their wife, is it removes anonymity.
Yeah.
You know who the other person is. And once you know who they are and they know who you are, you're accountable to your behaviour.
Yeah, that was the other thing in that documentary I was telling you about.
So it's like, you
missed
don't
the
step out of
neighbourliness.
line because you know that someone's going to knock on your door and drag you out in the street and give you a bloody hiding.
Yeah.
And we completely lost that.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, now
and
because
if
the
you're-
old guy's
now
going to be
you-
accused
if you're waiting on a junction and I see somebody pulling out who I recognise as my neighbour, I slow down naturally to let them out because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
recognise them, and it makes everybody nicer. I grew up in a sort of aspirational working class area of southeast London, where everybody knew each other's business, and it was all 90% immigrant community. Everybody knew each other, and we're all there for the same reason. So there was this kind of very classic sense of like, you don't air your dirty laundry in public, but there's always gossip, and always be aware of the gossip. And it does keep you on the straight and narrow. And this is the problem with when you move to an online world, and everyone says, oh, social media is not the real world. It kind of is the real world there nowadays. Let's be honest, it's not the real world, as David was saying last time we spoke.
Yeah.
And it gives you that feeling of complete anonymity that makes you, they say, well, why can't I call that woman a slag?
Yeah,
Why can't I say
yeah.
she's a bitch? Because no one's ever going to come after me, are they?
Yeah.
Whereas you try doing that in a mining village in Wales, and you see what happens to you.
It's a lack of consequence, isn't it?
Total lack of consequence. And shared space gives you the confidence in somebody else who can, they hold you to account and you hold them to account, and it's that checks and balances that's so important.
Do we think that these kind of traditional family structures and things, I mean, I agree with a lot of the slightly nostalgic memories, but I don't suppose they're going to come back naturally. Would it be justified to try and create legislation or tax pressures to try and recreate them?
There was this study I read recently, and we mustn't be too nostalgic, must be, and it was about how
some things are getting better.
At about puberty, 13, 14, how a girl's world shrinks, physical, where she can go, how she can go, who's going to pick her up, how she's going to get there, and a boy's world does shrink, but not to the same extent, So, lots of girls are. Their parents, it's two things. The parents are keeping them in, or they don't feel safe to go out. I mean, at my daughter's school, all the girls are wearing little shorts. They've got tights, knickers, and little shorts under the skirts because the boys will upskirt them, and all that. Yeah, but this is just a typical London school. It's not a bad school or anything like that.
Yeah,
so it's just that girls have to be sort of continually on board, not because every man is going to rape them, but because they get a lot of there's a lot of street harassment. I mean, once girls get to about 12, 13, there's just it's really uncomfortable.
Because the guys know that they can get away with it.
Well, also because the
it's
girls are
anonymous.
under two pressures, aren't they? On the one hand, they know that there's that hostility, but at the same time, if they dress modestly, that leads to ostracisation as well.
I mean, the sad thing is, a lot of young men are very awkward and they don't know how to approach a woman. I mean, it takes a lot of practice. So they say stupid things,
What would you
old
do?
guys do
What
it
would you
too.
do
Old guys do it.
To educate? Would you change sex education lessons to be more about?
I tend to go to think that parents are the best thing for sex education, but certainly respecting the opposite sex, I think is something definitely that schools, not in a preachy way, but I mean, it's just in a humanistic way. You just respect other people.
Yeah. Do you think, James, that a lot of this comes down to the fact that we don't have that third generation under the household anymore? So, like years ago, you would typically have your grandparents, your parents, and your kids all in. Like I was brought up that way. And my grandparents raised me because my parents were working day and night.
Yeah,
and I had my grandfather raising me, but also he got married in his 20s. My mum started having kids in her 20s. By the time he was 55, he had all his grandchildren. He sold his little cafe in Bethnal Green.
I'm 56 next month. I would be such a good granddad.
But I mean, he had the time.
At home still,
I've got
Grandparents, they have the time, they have the wisdom.
You've got two grandchildren.
Yeah.
And you've got the time and you've got the wisdom, really, if you're retired especially.
Perfect.
And you can sort of take the pressure off the parents and say, okay, you guys can do what you need to.
I remember I had two sets. We lived in St Albans, like I say. My mother's parents lived in St Albans and came to us every Thursday afternoon. Drove my mother crazy, but they would always come and sit down on the sofa and expect tea and biscuits. And we'd go and see my other grandparents, who also lived in St Albans, at least once a fortnight. Quite often help out in the garden or whatever. My kids haven't seen. Well, this year they haven't seen their grandparents for a year. My parents live in Norfolk. But
No, I'm good.
what's up, Tim?
No coffees?
I'll have a coffee, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, coffee, white.
Cappuccino?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, cappuccino,
Okay,
cappuccino.
yeah, I'll have a cappuccino.
Cappuccino?
Yeah, okay,
James,
cappuccino.
what coffee would you
Yeah,
like?
cappuccino. lovely.
Cappuccino?
Oh, no,
Espresso
macchiato freddo.
macchiato.
Thanks, my friend. Would anyone like any dessert? I'm fine, but-
I'm good.
No.
Actually, I don't really.
But they don't see them at all, and the others they see maybe once a month or whatever. And even then, there's no. You have to actually live with people or see them quite frequently for them to feel any confidence in saying you spoil that child or so and
I
so's
mean,
getting
that-
fat. You can't say that if you see them once a year. You don't want to spoil the day, do you? They need to be
I
part of
have
it.
my daughter and partner and child living with me as a result of the pandemic.
Right.
So I am,
Sorry, your daughter and her partner.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
their baby.
Right.
So I am.
So you are that person.
I am. But I really try to. I mean, they have a separate space. We share the bathroom, but otherwise they're quite separate. I really try not to judge how they want to be with Elliot because, and the same with my other daughter, because I can see that things change. For instance, when when they were little, I worked all the time. I just worked all the time, and my daughters have really chosen, probably I would say, to probably have less money and to be with their children more.
Yeah.
I think that's a choice they've made, and I respect that. You know, and I think it's that's. I just was like,
Do you regret working too hard when you were growing up? Or
No.
No. Got to go out of the house.
I'm still, I'm not a baby person at all. I love them once they start to toddle about and talk.
Yeah.
When they become interesting.
Yes.
I love them when they start to do Led Zeppelin guitar
Yes,
solos.
yes. But I'm. But somebody said to my daughter the other day, because she explained that she was living at home, and they said, and they had I can't remember the word. Oh, that you're doing that kind of parenting or something. And there was a word for it. And
Gentle
it
parenting or
and
severe
although
parenting.
it wasn't.
or-
It was just like, no, they had a flat. They couldn't. During the pandemic, his wages went right down. They ended up living with me, and do you know what? I like it, but I don't feel that I'm there to show them how to.
That's
bring
interesting
up a
because we were
child.
talking about that earlier. How much of your parenting is down to your decision making,
Yeah.
and how much it's passed on from your,
Yeah.
without you even necessarily knowing it, that you've inherited all your
yeah.
parents' kind of dysfunctions, and you're now. That's the danger, isn't it? I mean, man, hands on misery to man, all that stuff. It's like, where do our parenting skills begin and
you
end?
know that thing where you find the things that you said. I will never say that to my kid.
Yeah, and then you do.
And then you do.
Yeah.
We all won't do that, right? So
It's
But I think most people grow up thinking, I'm going to do things differently. I don't care what kind of parenting style you live under, you're persuaded because it's human nature.
Yeah,
When
to
we go
rebel.
through our life, you think, oh, they did that wrong and I blame them for my lack of discipline or lack of ambition or lack of focus, whatever.
it's
I
exactly.
don't think you can be better, any better to them than you are to yourself.
Yeah,
So
and-
you have to look after, make sure that you're fully functioning, so that you can be fully functioning.
I
The
mean,
weird thing is, though, some of the highest achieving people in the history of the world have come out of really bad families.
God, when you
sometimes
have you read
explosion.
the biographies of Boris Johnson? I mean, Jesus,
Oh, God,
that
yeah.
family. Jesus, I mean, God.
I don't know if he is that high achieving. I know that.
He's high office, not necessarily.
Some people might think being Prime Minister was quite high. I didn't know
Somehow he's made it look like a failure, but no, that's harsh.
So, I don't know how you're measuring achievement here.
Well, I felt Tony Blair was a pretty high achieving Prime Minister, and he felt a tough out. He wasn't happy with the way he was parented.
Really? No,
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
can't remember the details. I think with people like Johnson, I hate him as a phenomenon. I don't mind him that much one way or the other as an individual, but as a thing that he represents, I think he endorses a view that is very prevalent in society at the moment. We're off the track a bit. But that kind of people just breathe through life and run everything, and the table is tilted in their direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm like, oh God, just when I'm thinking, actually it's more complicated than that, you see him get there and you just go, no, it's not, is it? It's just that still, it's just that.
But he's like the anti-king energy, isn't he?
Yeah.
We're talking about this, about like men need that stable king energy
Yeah.
in society to
Yeah.
keep everybody in check. There was this case I remember ages ago, I can't remember when, in Botswana, where they had problems with all the elephants started going rogue. And they
Right.
had all these teenage elephants.
The must.
Yeah,
Is it
basically
must?
going around sort of trampling on stuff, and they couldn't
Yeah.
figure out what the hell was going on. And then they realised that for one reason or another, hunting, poaching, whatever, all the elder elephants had basically died. So somebody said, okay, well, let's tranquilise and helicopter in older elephants, these kind of like elder guys. And they put down 2 older elephants in there. And it just calmed everything down.
Subdued them.
It
Wow.
completely subdued everything. And
A
it calmed
very
everything
rare
down.
occasion in which a biological intervention doesn't lead to an escalation.
I mean, I just think that, you know, if you've got to have that kind of level of that sort of that good king structure, that good king energy that keeps everything in place. And you think, you know, who is that? Is that Boris? Is that who it is? Because if that's who it is, then God help us all.
No. I
Well,
mean,
ambition, fierce ambition can get you a long way.
but
can't
he
it?
also,
He's not even properly ambitious, though. I feel he's not been the worst thing that's ever happened to this country, but I do always feel a slight pressure to sort of defend him somehow.
why?
What sort of a man is he, though? If we're talking about masculinity, is he
This
an alpha
the
man?
alternative to Corbyn, I suppose, at that point, it just seems such a disastrous alternative.
God, I
you
mean,
know,
Well,
so-
please,
but he's very
please,
similar.
please, I mean-
but he's very similar.
They're both narcissists, and you know,
that's interesting.
I
Yes,
mean,
I think so. Yeah.
Would you say he was alpha?
but he's
Cameron kind of was.
Yeah.
when he
Can
did
I
his
say
signing.
I have a small observation about alpha, which is I think is one of those terms we've imported from David Attenborough.
Yeah, I don't really know,
I'm
yeah.
not sure it really applies, but as a stand-up, when you do a 20-minute set in front of an audience that like respond to it and get engaged, and then go off to the bar afterwards just to get a drink for yourself, not to like soak it up the adoration. I will always encounter a couple of men who have felt their own alpha status with their own girlfriend threatened by who I was on stage, just the degree to which I was holding everyone's attention. I want to come up, not aggressively, but just like reassert their own dominance.
Yeah.
And I'm always immediately like, it's fine. Honestly, that's an act.
sort of
I
thing
get,
do they
I get
say?
that.
That's
In,
what I
I
need
get
to
that in
do,
a
not-
restaurant.
do you? Like-
Yeah. If a guy's on a date,
Yeah.
then I typically say to my wife, Mariana, I say, you look after that table. Because if
Yeah,
I go
yeah.
there, it's the barbs.
This
you get
is
this
my
constant
place,
barbs.
I run all these people.
You know,
yeah,
and you get,
yeah.
and you know, and the stupid Italian accents that they put on, and you just think,
I'm
oh,
probably
give it
worried
a
that they're going to
rest.
fancy you or something.
But what's interesting is that when I started having children, I've got 3 kids now. When my wife was first pregnant, I noticed a sharp decline in that.
Right.
And I wonder if that's where they thought, oh well, you know, like
You
he's
were
about
giving
to
off
be
a
a
slightly
dad. I was
different-
giving off a
Different
slightly
odour.
different. And they say that when a woman is pregnant, the partner's testosterone level dips very slightly. And I wonder how much of that is sort of, I don't know, like some
Can we get on to this? Testosterone is really interesting to me. I don't know if I mentioned this to you personally, but I've done it in the show that was cancelled due to lockdown. I was in real trouble about 3 years ago. A lot of mental fog, really indecisive, really struggling, depression. You know, couldn't see my way through life. And I got blood tests done, and I had catastrophically low testosterone, like really low, like off the bottom of the red. Like they had to put a new mark on the graph to show where mine was. And that might have just been a bad morning, you know. But anyway, I signed up. And I do a long set about it in the show about how I gradually sort of work my way through to getting testosterone replacement therapy, similar to what women, of course, have when they hit the menopause, you know, and they almost universally find it helps them. But very few men, I think, are aware that it can be as serious. Now, I don't know how long that had been going on. I honestly think sometimes that when I think about my whole life, I could easily have been actually struggling with that more than I realised. That a lot of, in my 20s, I really struggled after university to make a decision about where to live and to get myself a flat. I was sofa surfing for ages for no reason, no good reason. I could earn money, I was intelligent and had a degree, but there were all kinds of things. I don't know what it might have been. But testosterone has got a really bad rap in society at the moment. It's sort of like associated with toxic masculinity and so on. You know, there's this idea that people who have too much testosterone represent a threat, you know, or that there's a kind of, you know, that Tyrannosaurus Rex book, Cordelia Fine, I think, wrote, which is, I haven't read it, I should, you know, I'm not going to like attack it without having done so, but a perception that it's a shibboleth of men's rights activists, that men have testosterone and you know, and they have this, you know, blah blah blah. But I think we really underestimate the degree to which hormonal health basically is like the bedrock of being able to be the kind of person you need to be. And I'm not sure how universal it is at the moment. Certainly we know that fertility, like sperm counts are plummeting. You know, much lower levels of all this kind of stuff. And we don't
Do we
really
know
know
why that is?
We think it must be environmental because it's not happening in the less developed world. It seems to be associated with possibly estrogen runoff
From tap
but
water.
from tap water. It might be to do with plastic bottles, might be to do with soy products. It
I
could
did
be
a-
a complex of
yeah.
all these things, and it's also affecting animal life. Like I read one thing about it was a woman called Deborah Cadbury, who I think is part of the Cadbury family. But anyway, she wrote a book about it, about the sort of problems in nature generally. They were in, I think, Florida, and taking alligator samples that had like mangled sexual organs, that they were like really small and weren't really functioning. This due to an environmental thing that alligators were encountering, and yet they really struggled to work out what it is. It's like we're still trying to unpick it, but what it isn't is not being taken seriously. I don't think anyone
did a piece about the
seriously
male
seems to think it's
menopause.
serious, you know.
The male menopause, I think is a real thing. I got a lot of flack for it because women would say, "Oh God, you know, it's just an excuse."
Get over yourself.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I interviewed someone called Marion Gluck who specialises in hormone replacement, and you know, I was convinced by it. I mean, having been very sceptical, you know, I think when you start to lose your testosterone, you know, well, your sexual desire starts to go for one, which definitely affects your mood. You start to lose your confidence, and self-esteem can go. So I think one thing definitely leads to another. I think we definitely underestimate the power of hormones for both sexes.
Hugely. I think hormones.
Who goes to the GP nowadays and gets their hormones checked?
No one.
No one.
You have to pay. I mean, I paid happily to get the blood test, but then you go to the GP with the results, and they.
Did you have those disgusting lozenge things?
For the testosterone, they gave me something called Testogel, which was very much like the alcohol-based sort of hand cleansing stuff, and you wipe it into your upper arms. And I mean, I talk about it mainly seemed to enrage dogs. You know, it just I didn't feel any better. But
enraged or turned on?
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. No, you need an injection really, but.
Fertility rates globally are dropping.
Yeah.
It's a real. I went and did a story with the UN in Armenia because they. Everybody knows that there's fetal sex selection goes on in Pakistan, in China, in India. It actually goes on in lots of other places. And Armenia is one of them, Azerbaijan is another. So, like, you can literally walk into a classroom and there'll be 20 little boys and 5 girls. So women, because it's an ex-Soviet country, abortion is almost like a form of contraception. So I was interviewing women who'd had. I mean, obviously, I'm not against abortion, but you know, young women who had like 12 abortions because they were girls, right? Okay. So the UN guys I was with, they're fantastic. They know all about this stuff. They were so smart and so clever, and they were saying as fertility rates drop in these traditional societies that value boys as earners, really, you know, because a lot of Armenians go and work in Russia. You will get this fetal sex selection, and we've really got to do something about it. And I often think about the people I met there and all of that stuff, because I learnt so much. But you know, in part of the whole sort of, I don't want to get stuck on it, but the whole trans argument is that sex is assigned at birth, and so it's a random thing. Well, actually, sex is assigned in a fetal scan at around 12 weeks, and people make decisions based on that. But fertility is an issue. Hormones, I agree completely about
There's
what's
embarrassment.
happening.
You have to ask neighbours, don't you?
I went to ask who?
Neighbours. My wife asked neighbours. She had an next door neighbour. She was like,
My next door neighbour's the Turkish guy. It'd be really weird. It'd be really very weird if I asked my neighbour what was going on with my mum. No, I remember going to my GP though, and he was lovely, and she said, "Well, you're perimenopausal," and I'm like, "What's that?" Peri. It's a stage before you. And I said, "Well, how long does that go on then?" She said, "Could be 10 years." I was like, 10 years? I was stuck, and then I went home, started reading about it and trying to understand because I wasn't having a terrible time apart from insomnia, but insomnia is hormonal, absolutely hormonal, because it's. My insomnia was caused by too much cortisol, which is your opposite hormone to insulin. Because what happens is when the body can't reproduce, it's something trying to kickstart you. Even though I'm too old to, the woman's body gets too old to have babies. Something starts to try to give me antidepressants, and I kept saying, "I'm not depressed. This isn't I'm not depressed. You know, this isn't. But it's a physical thing going on. And then I started looking at the. I've read Marianne Glack's work. That stuff didn't work for me. I think it works really well for some people. But I just realised, as you're saying, Simon, how little we know about that stuff, and the models that we use, and the kind of moral judgments we make around the interaction between our minds and bodies, really. And that's where hormones come in, because they really, I mean, even with COVID, it was clear from the beginning, it was more men were going to get COVID, but more, first of all, they were putting it down to lifestyle, smoking, and then they realised as it got more global, men are more prone to it. Women are more prone to autoimmune disease. You know, it's like we are different, and we should. I think that thing of not being able to say, like, there are actually,
and it's not borne out in statistics.
There
There
are differences between men and women, and that doesn't mean that we can't be. We can be, you know. That doesn't mean we can't be equal, but we should acknowledge. But we should acknowledge the difference.
But I think something else is happening, which is muddying the waters, especially in terms of the male-female divide, which is that I think we're exposed to a lot of environmental stresses now, which haven't been there historically, especially, I suspect, chemical ones.
Yes, I
and consequently, we have, as societies and cultures, developed responses to how you should. When you get past a certain age, culturally, historically, socially, most people take it upon themselves to stay fit, stay healthy, don't drink too much, and these are the virtues and these are the sins, and this is how you behave and you'll be all right. And now suddenly they're not necessarily adequate, because we are exposed to stresses and pressures. As I say, many of them, I call them stresses, but I mean things in the water or whatever, that are more challenging, that make it harder for you to be a good person. You know, I mean, it really is literally that. It's like it's hard to be a good person if your hormones are out of whack.
But how much of what you said about your hormone? How much? I
was really thinking, I don't know if I can carry on. I mean, not to talk about suicidal ideation, but you think it's hard being a stand-up if you don't kind of feel like you're on top of your game. You know, you're only on stage for half an hour.
Your whole work depends on it. It's the crux of your life.
On top of which you've got kids and their problems, and
I mean, the whole mental health thing is interesting.
Everyone wants to be on top of their game.
It's become very much a sort of.
And what Kate said, my wife, you know, was she was like surprised. You know, you get testosterone, and now you're much less what she thinks of as like toxic masculinity, which is to say, much less snappy,
less
Victorian dad, irritable. Exactly. You're much more relaxed in your own skin, and.
I wonder how much of this, like the whole mental health things that we're talking about now, is going to be. I'm quite optimistic about the future because of the use of psychedelics and the use of psilocybin, which I think now for the first time for so long, it's becoming more mainstream. And I think you look at all the problems that it's really curing, and then depression, anxiety, addictions, PTSD, and I'm wondering how much of that now is actually this kind of sense of this almost. Because they've been used for centuries.
James, I just got sent Michael Pollan's new book. He's a man who was a food critic.
A new book.
Yeah, it's called Plant Medicine, and it's got a great title like Opium, Caffeine, Mescaline. nice title.
That's a great
trifecta. Nice. Let's be taken together.
Yeah, but no, they are. I mean, not just for sort of recreational purposes. I mean, they are using it in the John Hopkins, also for terminally ill people.
Yeah, there's that brilliant Michael Pollan, wasn't
and it's when I was doing my therapy course, a lot of the younger people were microdosing, and I thought I'm interested in that stuff because.
Is this for depression?
No.
Just
creativity a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean they would be quite open about it, and they'd say, because there's a sort of regime once every 3 days, a tiny amount, blah, blah, blah. And I said 2 or 3 days, the last couple of days was great. And then today, I think, I wasn't, because we were in lectures, I was all over the shop. I've done, I've done too much. I haven't divided it because it's, anyway. But some people do it for depression, some people do it to increase their flow, their thing. I mean, it's not something that, I think it's not something you would do forever, but you might want to have a go at it for a month or something. I mean, I did a mushroom retreat just when all this before the shit hit the fan at the Guardian, and it was. But I was partly interested in going because I wanted to know about, because it costs £2,000, and I wanted to know who pays £2,000 to take some mushrooms.
Where is it, in Holland?
Mushrooms or
£2,000?
ayahuasca?
Mushrooms, just truffles.
To take £2,000, they used to just buy them in Camden Market.
I was going to say.
That's that's partly what I sold the story on, right?
Yeah.
Was because I was doing it for a newspaper. Was what kind of people, £2,000. And not only had they, when I got there, not only had they paid £2,000, they'd flown in from New York, from Canada.
Stayed in hotels.
We stayed in it. It was fantastic. I mean, it was luxury. I mean, it should be for 3 days, £2,000.
This is the future of tourism. It's like people go to Thailand for plastic surgery.
So we're a group of 12. 4 of the people were doctors.
Mushrooms. Love mushrooms.
Yeah, I don't think mushrooms are really my thing. But
get them on the menu here, James.
Environmental health might have something to say about that.
You see, it was all a legal thing because they actually truffles. They made the table beautiful, and then you made your own tea and drank it. My thing was, and I disrupted. I know I didn't mean to disrupt the group, but I did because I kept asking, like when we're like, take the mushrooms. What music? Music's really important to me. I love music, and I wanted to listen to the music I wanted to listen to. And they said, no, we have a special soundtrack that Imperial College have put together. It will take you through your trip. And I said, if it's that bloody
song,
plinky plonky bloody
new age
music,
I don't.
I don't
endless
want resolutions.
And I'm lying there. We're all lying there. We've all been brushed with sage and had the magic ritual. And the Dutch people are very Dutch, And I'm lying there. You have the blindfold, and then I could feel the mushrooms starting a bit, and then the fucking plinky plonky music, and I just lie there. And then everyone has a guide, and mine was sort of sitting cross-legged behind me, meditating, etc. And I was writing this. I hate this music. In the end, and then within about an hour or so, some people were sobbing and crying and screaming. Nothing much was happening for me, but that's because I'm a hardcore, sort of person. And some particularly awful bit of music ended, and I said, thank fuck for men and their play tracks, their playlists. And everybody started laughing, but the person in charge came in and said, would you like to be taken out of the sacred circle? And I said, yes, very much.
I thought,
so is there a pub that's open?
So I was then taken to this lovely room, and then a medical student was assigned to me. This is why it cost £2,000, because it is totally safe. And I said, can I go and get a book to read? And they said, no, because anything could happen. And I was like, no, I just...
This is literally just mushrooms, psilocybin.
Yes! And I wasn't...
This is absurd.
People have been doing this for...
I take mushrooms up in the Lake District. We go walking. I mean, it's been a while, but
I know.
It's not hard.
So I was being looked like I'm lying on a couch saying, and they said, I felt a bit yawny, but I just wasn't tripping at all. And I said, look, can I get a book? I'm a bit bored now. And they said, I said, very Dutch, what music do you like? Maybe some David Bowie to make you happy. I'm like, yeah, all right.
You look like you might like David Bowie.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. But can I, because I said, how's it going for the other people? And they said, they're going to be in there for another 8 hours, and we're not going to eat, until after. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God. But anyway, it was since then, I've done the sort of Camden job, if you like, which does the job in a completely safe space. What I can't understand and always say to my children is, you just don't wander around festivals off your head. Just try and stick the same people and do it. But as a treatment for depression and for mental health and for anxiety, I mean, we're very scared of it, but it is working.
The interesting though, what you were saying earlier about James about like rites of passage and stuff about entering manhood or girlhood. I think possibly a psychedelic experience could be quite a useful part of that as well.
I've never had one. I've never done mushrooms, so I wouldn't know. But
it humiliates in a good sense. I don't know.
It's sort of ego detachment, isn't it? It's taking you away from yourself.
Yeah, and you realise the things you don't know and the things you've taken for granted.
And you feel a sense of connection.
To
other
and you realise that you're sort of part of it. Yeah. If you look at the 12-step program, for example, which is based really on the Ignatian spirituality,
Ignatian.
Yeah, like Jesuit
Jesuits,
spirituality.
yeah, right.
spirituality. It's all they're all based all.
Is that Jesuit? Is it?
So they're all based on the same principles.
Yeah.
You are not important.
No.
It's not about you.
Yeah.
You're not in control.
Yeah.
You are going to die. You have to accept the situation for what it is.
Yeah. You're a cork on the ocean.
Exactly, you're a cork
Yeah.
on the ocean. And I think that, the 12-step program is probably the closest we've got to modern day.
Funny enough, Russell
Initiation.
Brand,
Yeah.
ladies
And
and
wrap it up.
gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for bearing with us as we delve into our psychedelic past. This has been a Common Sanity discussion with Suzanne Moore, James Chiavarini, James Ennis Smith and myself, Simon Evans. I do hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.